As often happens with clean technologies, it seems that things go in cycles. Middle of the 90s, when General Motors actually launched an electric vehicle, there was huge anticipation. Consumers seemed to love it, and yet it didn't last. So what went wrong last time, and what's different now? Let's start at the end. Rich, what's different?
So I think the biggest change is the fact that there's just a lot more players in the marketplace this time around than there was the last time. The last time, GM with the EV1, a significant player, as well as Toyota with a RAV4, and there were some other ancillary products. There was a big push in California with the battery electric vehicle requirements, so CARB standards, and that's what kind of precipitated and started the need for those battery electric vehicles within California. But when the standard was reduced, there was no longer the impetus to keep it going. I don't know if you recall, there was a lot of neighborhood vehicles, kind of like the golf cart type vehicles that were coming out at the time, that enabled a lot of the OEMs to actually meet some of their BEV requirements. But when CARB reduced those standards, there wasn't the draw anymore, and frankly, many of those vehicles just didn't have the consumer demand or meet the consumer requirements in many ways. So there was those that got them, loved them, and they were very upset when they were, pried from their hands. But they really didn't have the mass market appeal, and the OEMs, started to focus on other things where the regulatory requirements weren't pushing them to continue to put those out. And this time around, there's been a lot more impetus to get it going. Battery technologies have come considerably farther. At the time, that was primarily lead acid. Now with advanced technology batteries, with nickel metal hydride initially in the HEVs, and then with lithium-ion batteries, there's just been a lot of push that have enabled more of fewer sacrifices to need to be made on a consumer vehicle than have been made the last time. Jit can probably add a lot to that. So,
yeah, Jit, what do you think? What's different? Or is it different?
Yeah, so what's different this time? By way of background, I'm the CEO of Mission Motors, and what Mission Motors does, we're a Tier 1 supplier of advanced electric vehicle technology to new electric and hybrid vehicles of all different sorts, cars, motorcycles, a range of different vehicles. So as a technologist, my answer to this question is going to be simple. The difference is the technology. If you look at the Nissan Leaf battery pack, and you judge what it would have been 10 years ago, or 12 years ago in the late 90s, that battery pack would have been twice as heavy and 4 times more expensive, plain and simple. What's happening is because of the trends in consumer electronics, lithium-ion batteries have become more dense, they've become smaller, they've become cheaper, they're continuing to get smaller and cheaper. The other thing that happened was in 2008, gas prices hit $4 a gallon for the first time, and now we're just content to have them rest above $4 a gallon and not complain at all. But if you all remember 2008, it was a pretty big surprise for us. Every time the price of gasoline goes 10 cents higher, electric vehicles get a little bit more competitive. Every time the price of gasoline gets 10 cents higher, hybrid vehicles start to make a lot more sense. And that payback period that you're paying, that premium for electric or hybrid, gets to be a little bit better. So those two trends, the improvements in the technology, the reduction in prices that you're seeing, led by companies like GM, Tesla, but also through innovations at companies like Mission Motors, that combined with what's happening with global fuel prices, that's why electric vehicles are here to stay, even if we hit some bumps along the road in the early years.
Maryline, what's changed? So
I would also add, from all those points that we've made, since I represent Schneider Electric, and it's mainly about the infrastructure and the charging station, 10, 15 years ago, we did not have standard in the US for the technology, so the plug-in to charge a car very different depending on the car. So that's one element that was a little bit more challenging. And simply, like we said earlier, the investment from the automakers. The automakers, as you know, did not make the full investment. There was some prototype, I would say 2 prototypes in the US, and that was it. Today, we have 15 models coming on the market this year. You know Nissan, you know the Volt, Tesla, Fisker, where Ford is launching a car next week. You mentioned the sedan coming up from Tesla next week. RAV4 is coming up with a new version. You have European automakers, Volkswagen, Audi, BMW are launching electric cars. American automakers, pretty much everybody's part of the game now.
This may just be a lot of companies making the same mistake. Why does it help to have a lot of companies do the same thing? I mean, isn't this herd mentality?
Well, the opportunity, we talked about it a little bit. it provides the scale necessary to make the technology affordable, right? So if there are a lot of manufacturers out there that are actually creating these technologies or bringing the technologies to market, it helps companies, the tier one suppliers, to actually sell into
the
those.
Battery makers.
Right, exactly. The battery, the power electronics, the electric motors, all the components that go into the cost of these electric vehicles, and they are more costly on the front end. If you can bring those costs down, it makes the economic argument much better. And so the more manufacturers that actually invest in the technology development, the quicker we can get that cost down.
So it's got to get to scale.
Exactly.
To scale quick. Well, let's dig into some of these issues. Let's start with the batteries, Jit, that you mentioned. So they are by far the biggest cost in a car. Maybe what, 50% of the cost of an electric car?
In terms of an electric car, 50%, it depends if you're judging that based on the actual cost of goods within the car. Yes, for a lot of electric cars, they might get as high as 50%. For a hybrid car, it's very different, right? And let's remember, a lot of the conversation is about electric cars, but when we go to panels or speak as an industry, we talk about electrification. A hybrid car is the electrification of the car. It's a way of making that gasoline engine even more efficient by supporting it through the electric motor, which is far more efficient than a gasoline engine. So in a hybrid car, the battery pack is much smaller and a much lower portion of that cost. But just like Rich was saying, the fact that these technologies are out there now supported by the major OEMs, that's what's allowing us to go through and get the battery systems up to scale. You're seeing massive investments from the major battery companies in Asia. You're seeing A123, despite, yes, a share price that's going up and down in the last few weeks.
Mainly down.
Until yesterday when it ended at $1.50. One announcement about a new lithium-ion battery with brand new performance that is not targeted at consumer electronics. It's targeted at automotive and transportation, and it's targeted at grid storage. And look at what happens to its share price in one day, right?
It's a dollar stock, so it was a $30 stock, so it's gone, right? But I mean, well, let's just focus on the lithium-ion sort of question for a minute. So this is essentially what I have in my laptop that's been packaged, multiple unit cells and shoved into a car. This is inherently limited as a technology that, there's no Moore's law that applies to electric car batteries. It's slow progress, and we'll get on to the potential dangers of these batteries in a minute, but a serious question, what can we look forward to in the next 10, 15 years in terms of lithium-ion batteries? Are they a dead end for electric vehicles ultimately? Do we need to look to fuel cells or something else?
Well, so I'm going to become the spokesperson for the lithium-ion battery industry here.
Yeah.
So the trends that we've seen in lithium-ion batteries as a company, and I've been looking at this starting actually as a venture capitalist back in 2006, we've seen a steady improvement in lithium-ion batteries on the order of 5 to 8% per year. Certain years they're better, other years are a little bit worse, but 5 to 8% per year. Improvements in energy density, improvements in cost per kilowatt hour that you see within these battery systems. Every year that they get more competitive, the electric car continues to get more competitive. Now, are we at the point yet where an electric vehicle battery is cost competitive with a gasoline engine? Well, we have to remember, what is it that drives the economics around an electric vehicle? Just like many renewable energy technologies, you're paying a higher upfront cost, and then you're making it back over the course of that vehicle's life. Your cost per mile in an electric vehicle is far below anything you will ever pay in gasoline. So then the next question you have to ask yourself is, how many years before you make back that premium that you've paid on a battery pack, right? So current estimates are that it takes about 7 to 10 years. That's too long. We all know that's too long. There are companies that are trying to solve that problem. Companies like Better Place are trying to solve that problem through things like battery financing. But more importantly, as we go through and bring down that cost, and as the fuel price rises, that payback period gets shorter. Mm-hmm. And eventually we're going to cross that threshold where actually it is cost competitive. And you're not going to be paying, you're going to be paying a 3-year payback period, which is completely in line with consumer expectations.
Mm-hmm. Actually, the payback period is shorter if you integrate the maintenance of the cars. And that's one element why education is very important in this market, is the consumer market, as well as the B2B and business market, does not understand the full cost of operating cars in the fleet market. It's obvious, but also simple consumers. You don't know what your actual budget is per year and how much you pay in maintenance, change oil, parts, anything that needs to change, versus with the electric cars, all the spots are inexistent. The only thing you're going to do is to change the wheels maybe. Depends how much you drive.
Right, so I think from a total cost
Very simple.
From a total cost of ownership perspective, in some areas, we're starting to see parity right now with an ICE, with an internal combustion engine. The challenge is that payback period, and consumers don't buy vehicles on a total cost of ownership perspective. When they go to buy, the general consumer, when they go to buy the vehicle, they look at the sticker price and they say, that's what I need to worry about. They start to bring in some of those economics, but when you start to talk about, as Jit said, the 7 to 10 year payback, that's putting a lot of risk on the consumer, and they aren't necessarily willing to take that risk. So if we can bring that payback shorter, then their actual cost will be much lower than an internal combustion engine.
So is it a question of the value proposition? Is it pricing structures, business models? For instance, in the domestic solar energy industry, consumers buy it not on they don't pay the upfront cost and then try and calculate for themselves what the payback period is. It's all built into the
Right, so different business models or different leasing business models can actually help to make that work where you're not having to, this applies to non-consumer markets as well, more commercial and fleet markets where you have leasing scenarios where you're actually seeing that operating cost borne out in the lease payment and not in that upfront payment. So if you can get good financing arrangements with those that are willing to make those new business models to allow that, that would help to facilitate the incremental growth of EVs. But I think you're going to see that more on the fleet side first than you're going to see that on the consumer side.
So, Jit, you made it sound as though we're sort of it's getting towards parity in that, at $4. So what happens over the next few years? How much does it depend on energy prices going up versus battery price or vehicle costs coming down?
Well, I'll actually answer one of your earlier questions, and I think in a way answer that. The earlier question was around the Moore's Law of batteries, right? Is there a Moore's Law for batteries? And the answer is no, there's not. And maybe it's more that our expectation that there should be a Moore's Law for batteries is what's wrong. It's driven by electrochemistry. It's driven by fundamentally different science than what you see in the semiconductor industry, which is where Moore's Law comes from. What there is a portfolio of solutions, okay? It's not just about lithium-ion batteries being the end-all, be-all solution to our transportation energy needs. Lithium-ion batteries are an energy storage solution. For smaller urban commutes, an all-electric car is the ideal solution. It will pay back very quickly. It'll pay back in less than 7 years for many use cases already at today's battery prices. You will see that happen. What can it not do? Well, it can't drive from Seattle to Los Angeles. You can't have an electric car that can do that without having to stop for multiple hours many times in order to charge. So there's going to be another solution that lives there. Maybe it's a hybrid. Maybe it's something like a Chevy Volt. In the long term, what you see out of a lot of the OEMs right now is something like a fuel cell hybrid, which helps to solve that same problem as well. I think that when we go through and think that lithium-ion batteries are the panacea solution that will solve the transportation problem, that's a myth. It's going to be a portfolio of solutions. Gasoline is going to be part of that mix. Biofuels will be part of that mix. Fuel cells will be part of that mix.
So are hybrids the answer for the short and even medium term? So Maryline, you talked about the number of EVs that are going to be launched in the next year or so. And that's a lot of vehicles trying out this market that maybe isn't there yet.
Well, there's a point you made earlier that the numbers of cars sold right now was fairly low. Actually, when you look at the projections from Pike Research and other research firm in the US, so 20,000 electric cars were sold last year. We had 30,000, and the growth is exactly at the level that what we expected. And the forecast is to have about 1 million cars sold by 2015. And so it's coming because the customer market has more choices. It has to do with the technology, and it's also about the charging infrastructure. So as you know, we all talk about this range anxiety issue, and this is mileage range that cars can be driving from 50 miles to 80 miles. Tesla is pushing that limits greatly. At the same time, in order to charge on a regular basis, you need to have this infrastructure. So it's taking place right now. Municipalities, government, counties, state and federal grant are getting involved to get some subsidies. It's a market that needs to be supported for now, like any energy market has been supported in the past. And more charging stations you're going to see, on the roads, in the highway, at your store, when you go shopping. More secure you will be about taking your electric car, and you can charge while you go shopping, for example. And those imply some business model as well, which are interesting for the host of those charging stations.
Now this is the ultimate chicken and egg problem, right? You've got a massive, potentially massive cost to build out a nationwide infrastructure of charging stations. And at 20,000 going up, well, I think 1 million in 2015 is at the very optimistic end of assessments, right? I think that's the president's assessment.
It's Obama administration goal, but actually the OEMs and the charging station manufacturers are about the same numbers right now.
So what happens on the infrastructure side? What are the economics that make charging stations possible?
So I think,
what do you think?
So there's a couple different plays on the infrastructure piece, and most charging, at least for the near term, is going to be home-based charging. About 70 to 80% of charging is going to happen in either a garage setting or a multi-unit tenant housing situation where you're going to go to the same charger every day and plug in, because just the range, as Jit was mentioning, for the majority of solutions where EVs make sense, it's for your commuting type situation. And so you're either going to plug in at work or you're going to plug in at home, and you're not going to need true public infrastructure charging. It's going to be, for the most part, public-based infrastructure is going to be for larger cities where they don't have home-based charging, or retail establishments that are using charging from a different business model perspective to attract the consumers that have purchased those types of vehicles to their place of business. And we saw that actually back in the 90s, the first time around, where various retailers were actually putting in various EV charging stations to support those customers coming into their workplace. So for the short term, it's not as much of a chicken and egg scenario, because we don't have vehicles that are going to benefit from level 2, which is the 220, 240 volt charging out there, except for in retail establishments. If we really need to address the range anxiety, that's going to happen with the level 3 DC fast charging, and right now the economics just don't make sense. And
give us an example. What does it cost to put in a level 3 versus a level 2? I mean, how much are we talking about here?
It's 5 times 6. It's a typical level 2 charger for a home can cost as low as $2,000 with some incentives, and maybe even free for some. A level 3 charger can cost $30,000 or above with. That's
what you need for a top up when you're out and about.
Right. So that you can charge with a level 3 DC fast charger, you can charge a battery in a full electric vehicle battery in about 30 minutes to 80% of its charge level, where a typical level 2 charger is going to charge upwards of about 6 to 8 hours, depending on the size of the battery. So it's going to be an overnight charge, top-off charge, but most of the time you're not going to have a battery that's been fully depleted based on the normal usage cycle. So you could use a DC fast charger more like a gas station. Just right now, it doesn't make economics, because you're not going to ever get that payback, because the majority of folks aren't going to be actually using that type of charging station when they're out and about. So, but those types of infrastructure challenges are, while it plays into the long-term viability of a mass market of EVs, it's not really where the initial challenges are. It's overcoming perceptions on how people are using the vehicles, how you intend to use it, that initial attractiveness of the vehicle to consumers, and as a lot of the research that we've done really focuses on how do you overcome some of those challenges, and that's by actually addressing a different consumer entirely. It's actually looking at the fleet customers, which have a more defined footprint. They have more defined route planning where they could put charging stations where they actually need them to actually meet their needs from an infrastructure perspective. That's not going to meet the public need, but it will meet the consumer, that particular customer's need. And from that perspective, it will allow some of these scale economies to grow as we get more of the technology out there, which will help to bring the DC chargers down.
How do private charging stations help public infrastructure?
They do it by actually allowing the technologies to develop. So the fleet customers can actually be the early movers, and they can buy that. By buying that technology, it helps to bring the cost down for everybody else.